clip out of Ken Cloke's session in that initial one that I had. So they do that. So now you can please start, Gunavathi, totally yours.
A very good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Gunavathi. I'm a lawyer by profession, but I would rather be known as a mediator because we're all passionate about mediation, and that's why we're here today. And Vikram has very kindly invited me to speak today as one of the speakers in his this symposium, which runs till September. I've been a mediator for the past more than 20 years, actually, more than 20 years. I am very passionate about this subject, like Vikram, and I think many of you here. And the thing is about mediation is it works. That's all I can say. It works, and people should embrace it with open arms. That's my view. And to tie it with today's topic, the impact of culture and tradition in mediation, I'm going to look at it also from the perspective of the Malaysian community. So if I may begin. Right, I'm sure many of you have been to Malaysia before, and there are three main ethnic groups in Malaysia. And we have a population of about 32.7 million people, which spanning across various ethnic groups, religions, and languages. But the three main ethnic groups are the Malays, the Chinese, and the Indians. So the largest ethnic group, the Malays, we also term them as Bumiputras, because the indigenous people of Malaysia, the Orang Asli as we call them, are also termed as Bumiputras, and they come within this ratio of 69.6% of the population now. This statistics is from the Statistics Department as of last year. And the Chinese make up about 22.6% of the population. And the Indians, a very small minority, 6.8%. And the remaining 1% are the other races, which we call Sarani, or Christians from certain parts of India or other parts of the world. And this is how the ethnic grouping is made out of in Malaysia. And culturally in Malaysia, as in many other Asian countries, mediation is not a new concept. It is actually deep rooted in the communities, in the various communities. And before moving on to the existence or the roots of mediation in all these different communities, let's look at some of definitions of culture. Because although Vikram has included culture and tradition together, but in my view, they are two different things. Sometimes it is used interchangeably, because my view is that culture is actually the big umbrella. Tradition is part of culture. So looking at the definitions of culture here, these are some of the academic definitions. One of which is the collective programming of the mind that distinguishes one group from another group, basically. So the other definition says the character of a social group, the values and norms which are shared by a particular group. And there's another definition which says culture originates and is manifested in the manner in which a group of people solve problems and reconciles dilemma. So what you can see is that there are many different definitions of, these are all academic definitions, as I said. But breaking it down further, the difference between culture and tradition are as follows. So basically, when you talk about culture, it is in reference to a particular group or community. And this may include race, gender, it could be socio-economic background, level of education, knowledge, morals, law, customs. and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. So basically, that is culture. So cultural differences may vary from a multitude of factors, and these are some of the factors which I have highlighted here. Now, tradition, on the other hand, describes a group's beliefs and behaviors that are passed down from one generation to another. So it could be customs, national anthems, holidays, beliefs, or customs by certain religious denominations. One example I can give you is like in Malaysia, because it's a multicultural, multilingual society, there are intermarriages between the different ethnic groups. I come from one such mixed marriage. So I'm speaking from experience, cross-culture experience, because my mom is Chinese and my dad is Indian. So it's a mixed culture. So when we are brought up, we not only are brought up according to the culture of both, I speak for myself, of both the Indian and the Chinese culture, but also some of the traditions are similar. So, and sometimes this similarity in traditions are passed down from one generation to another generation. And even between the Muslims and the Indians, let's say they are Indian Muslims, there are many Indian Muslims in Malaysia as well. And originally they come from India, yeah, and they came to Malaysia many years ago, centuries ago. And some of the, although they are Muslims, but some of the traditions which they follow are also in Indian Hindu traditions, which Hindus say it belongs to them. So because of this intermarriages and mingling between the parties, so some of these traditions have also been shared by the different communities in Malaysia. So this picture here is a group of the indigenous tribes in Malaysia, and they are termed as Bumiputras, as I said, and the head count will be part of the Bumiputra head count, which according to the statistics department make out to be 69% of the Bumiputras. Yeah? So they are Muslims as well, and they have their native language like Kadazan, Bidayu, Dusun. So depending from which part of the country they come from, because they come from East Malaysia mostly, and it's known as Sabah and Sarawak. So this is the Bidayu clan from Sarawak, this picture. So basically, if you go back to the roots of mediation in Malaysia, the main traits, I would say, are as follows. So they are generally third-party facilitators. They could be a respected elder from the community or from the village. It could be a religious leader, could be community leaders, like in this community, a respected, someone they respect from that particular community, someone who has standing and credibility in their community. But all these gave way once the British came to Malaysia, and all these roots gave way to litigation under British influence, I suppose, like in many other Asian countries as well. And let's go into the different ethnic communities. I just want to take you through the three different ethnic communities in Malaysia and talk about how mediation existed pre-colonization and what happened after that. So let's start with the Malays, the largest ethnic group. The largest ethnic group are the Malay community, as I said, and they are officially Muslims. And they come from the Sunni sect and from the school of Shafi. And they originated from mainland Southeast Asia and Indonesian islands and around 1500 BC. And the word Malay here also includes ethnics of Bugis descendants, Boyan, Minangkabau, Javanese, and all these ethnic groups came to Malaysia or migrated to Malaysia to form the Malay community. And this was way back in the 1850s. So traditionally, what happened is this Malays adopted local religious beliefs and also adopted some of these beliefs from the migrants who came into Malaysia. And so these practices were traditionally handed down from one generation to another. So culturally, conflict within the Malay community was resolved by referring the dispute to the village, could be a village elder, or village in Malay means kampung. So ketua kampung means a village headman. So it could be an elder or could be the headman in the village. It could be the imam, who is the religious leader, or it could be the penghulu, who is the community leader for a particular community. So this is how traditionally disputes were resolved. And the neutral third-party facilitator, as I would term all of them, because I don't know whether what they actually practiced was mediation. So I'm going to refer to them as third-party facilitators and not mediators for this presentation. So their method of resolving a dispute was also, the respect was given to them, and they were appointed as these third-party facilitators because they were someone who was respected in their community. And most of the disputes which they resolved were involving land matters, religion matters, customs, and disputes within their own communities. So they used the interpretation of Islamic law and customs, which is traditions, and they used these as an aid to help them resolve disputes within the Malay community. So conflicts within the Malay household were kept as a secret within the family. They were very secretive about what was any dispute. And I suppose they didn't want it to spread within the community or the village or the kampung, as we would refer to. So they were very secretive about what happened. And information was limited to a few people within the family circle, because the kind of disputes which they dealt with were basically, as I said, land and religious matters and family disputes. So a typical scenario for a so-called mediation session or a third-party facilitation is conducted by the penghulu when a complaint is lodged to the penghulu. So the time and venue for the session is fixed by the penghulu, who will then contact the other disputant. So the venues for all this mediation or facilitation could be at a mosque, could be at a house, could be at the penghulu's house, or could be at a community center. So the role of the mediator or the facilitator here would be more of an evaluative sort of facilitation, and not the interest-based facilitation which we understand now currently, which is practiced almost everywhere. And I think most mediators are interest-based facilitators, and we are all trained in, I speak for myself, I was trained in interest-based facilitative mediation. That's the model which I was trained in, and I think many of the mediators here as well. And prior to colonization, the Malays also relied on suluh. Suluh means the end of a dispute. So this picture here depicts a kampung or a village in Malaysia. Actually looks like quite a nice kampung. I think it's quite a modern kampung, not during the pre-colonization era, because definitely it didn't look like this. Although I was not born then, but I think this is a newer photograph of a kampong, which I have depicted here. And so coming back to Sulo, Sulo literally means the end of a dispute. So basically cutting off a dispute. So Sulo was practiced by the Muslims in Malaysia, pre-colonization as well. And the kind of disputes were again family disputes, land disputes, those kind of disputes. We're not talking about commercial disputes, not at that time. So it is normally conducted again by the religious leader, the imam, or a village headman. So this practice of Sulo actually originated from the era of Prophet Muhammad and the caliphates of Islam. So the Sulo concept was practiced by the Malay community before British rule. And very interestingly, in Malacca is one of the states in a very historic state in Malaysia. And this before the British came, the arrival of Islam in Malaya began actually, just a slight deviation, some history on Malacca, when Malacca became a Muslim kingdom under the reign of a Sultan called Sultan Iskandar Shah. So it is believed that Islam was brought to Malacca by the Indian traders and became the center for spread of Malay culture and of Islam to the region. So during the reign of Sultan Muzaffar Shah and in the Malacca Sultanate, the Malacca Law Digest and the Maritime Laws of Malacca were compiled. This was sometime in 1424 and 1444. So these compilations provided, very interestingly, for resolution of property disputes by Sulo. So they were talking about mediation way back in 1424. And it is provided in the Malacca Digest that in a property claim, an amicable settlement is lawful after the claim has been acknowledged by the defendant. An amicable settlement is not lawful when one party denies the claim and in a case of a person who is not certain of his action. So this is a translation of what appears in one of the chapters in the digest in Malacca. So typically here again, the Sulo proceedings are conducted by a respected elder or the imam or the sultan of the state sometimes. And the elders could be again the headman or religious leader. Now, of course, the headman of a village at that time is expected to look after the welfare of the villagers. And the headman may actually be appointed based on his religious background or show of pious observance of his religious duty. So he's someone who they look up to, because Islam, the imam is symbolic of the Islamic status of the village. So that's why they look up to him to have their disputes resolved. And the Sultan also has a role to play. A Sultan is he is the king of the state, of his state, okay? And they play a central role in educating the community in both religious precepts and facilitation of disputes, and enforcing sanctions against offenders, which of course included things like flogging adulterers, fining thieves, stoning, and killing murderers. So this was all pursuant to the religious ways of resolving disputes and the punishment accorded. So the Pengulus lost, as I said, once the British came and colonized Malaysia. It was known as Malaya then. And the role of the Pengulu slowly got withered down. And the Pengulus were then appointed into administrative positions in the government, in the British service. And they were answerable to a district officer and assistant district officer. And normally these district officers and assistant district officers are of British citizens. So they had to report. They had so much of autonomy at one time. They had control over the entire village. And now they've handed over everything to the British. And litigation was then introduced to Malaya. And that was, we could see the slow withering down of mediation and facilitation after the British took over Malaya. Next, moving on to the Suluh proceedings, Suluh. Fortunately, the Sharia courts now in Malaysia, actually they were the first courts, the Sharia courts. We have the Sharia courts in Malaysia and we have the civil courts. The Sharia courts only deals with the Muslims, family law rights and heritage, etc. Okay, but so the non-Muslims are not bound by the Sharia courts. We go to the civil courts. Just a little history about the courts administration in Malaysia. And they also practice suluh now in Malaysia. So it's carried down. Fortunately, this concept of suluh was carried down to the Sharia courts. And the Sharia courts were the pioneers in introducing court annexed mediation in 2002. And they have a codified enactment in each state. So every state has its own enactment. And this is a typical picture of a mediation or suluh proceedings carried out in the Sharia courts. So, but unfortunately, the Sharia courts, I don't know whether fortunately or unfortunately, the Sharia courts, although they practice mediation, which is, I've seen their manuals, and the manuals are basically facilitative, interest-based mediation models. And they don't allow, as I said, fortunately or unfortunately, they don't allow lawyers to be present during the suluh proceedings. So this is open for discussion. I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. So that's how they conduct mediation or suluh in the Sharia courts at present, and it's continuing. And just to contrast, when mediation started, court annexed mediation started in the civil courts in Malaysia, it was way after the Sharia courts, which was sometime in 2010, after the courts introduced it by way of a practice direction. So there's no hard and fast rule. There's nothing in the rules of court which mandates the use of mediation in Malaysia. So it is all by way of practice directions introduced by the courts, by the Chief Justice to the courts. So now currently in Malaysia, we do have the civil courts practicing court annexed mediation, and they have specialized mediation centers in every state. And the mediators, so if a dispute comes before the court, the matter is then referred to the mediator by the judges, or parties can then request. There are two ways. One, the judges refer the dispute to the mediation center of the respective court. Like, let's say in Kuala Lumpur, you have the Kuala Lumpur Mediation Center, and it's referred to the center by the judges or by the disputants themselves, and when they request for mediation through their lawyers. And lawyers are permitted to attend these mediation sessions. So that was only in 2010. And in Malaysia, we also have the Mediation Act 2012, which came into force sometime in August 2012. So moving on, the Chinese community. Now, the Chinese community is the second largest ethnic group in Malaysia. And they arrived in Malaysia between the 16th and mid-20th centuries and originated from different parts of China. So the first Chinese to settle in the Strait settlement, which is Malacca, they intermarried, as I said, they have, because of the culture, they intermarried some of the Malays who were there. And there's another ethnic group called Baba and Nyonya, or we call them Peranakan. They are Chinese, they are not Muslims, but their attire and the way they speak, the language and the food they eat have very heavy Malay influence. So, and they also are attired like the Malays with the baju kurung and the baju kebaya. And so coming back to the Chinese they basically came from mainland China, and they are all mostly Chinese immigrants. So these Chinese immigrants who came to Malaysia were basically governed by the Kapitan system, which is translated into headman. So this picture of this gentleman here is Yap Aloy. He was a very respected person in the Chinese community, and he was one of the Kapitans at that time. And similar to the Pengulus in the Malay community, the Kapitans were the headman for the Chinese community who resolved these conflicts that arose between the immigrants. And the Chinese immigrants in Malaysia adopted and practiced forms and mediation practices and techniques which were from China. So it's very interesting because these techniques which they practiced were basically traditional, based on traditional Chinese values. And the type of disputes ranges from family disputes, marriage disputes, and land matters. So you can see that it is actually very similar to the Malays, the type of disputes which were mediated or facilitated. And the mediators or facilitators again come from respected elders, neighbors, and clan leaders. So in mediation, in Chinese, is known as shui. Shui is basically, if you translate shui, which is S-H-U-O-H-E, it means speaking peace, which literally, if you translate that is mediation in a traditional meaning. So the Chinese community also relied on religion to resolve disputes. So they practiced Confucianism and Taoism, and they used the teachings of Confucius and relied on all the philosophy of promoting peace and harmony with the universe. So the harmony depends upon one's position in life and can only be maintained by proper behavior. So that is the philosophy of maintaining peace and harmony. So that's supposed to be a picture of Confucius. So this is relationship, harmony, and cooperation. So that is the theme or the thread in Confucianism. And the emphasis of harmony led to reliance on a third party to help resolve disputes. So the virtue also led to practices of consensual problem solving within the Chinese community with the assistance of a third party. So these influences were adopted by the Chinese community in Malaya at that time. And one example which I can give you, because this is documented, there was this Chinese temple in Malacca. As I said, it's a historic state. It was founded in 1949, this particular temple in Malacca. It's known as the Ing Chun Ancestral Temple. And this temple had actually included provisions for amicable dispute resolution in its rules and regulations. It's so amazing because this was like such a long time ago, and it was actually documented as part of the rules and regulations of the temple. Mediation was actually regulated by this temple. So that is how the Chinese practiced third-party facilitation. Moving on to the Indians. Now, the Indians, of course, originate from India, and they're mostly, during the colonial era, they were mostly from Tamil Nadu, and they were basically laborers who came into Malaysia to do a lot of hard work for the British, and they built railways, and they were mostly used as laborers in the plantations, because the agricultural sector basically relied on the Indians to carry out to manage the plantations, etc. So many of these descendants who migrated from India during the British colonization of Malaya, they form the 6.8% of the population today. And mediation, of course, if you go back to the Vedic days, the Vedic period, I think mediation existed then in India. So when these people migrated, the Indian community migrated to Malaysia, they brought these practices as well, and they adopted these practices as well. And so again, in traditional villages, in the Indian villages, the traditional village structure called for a peaceful resolution of disputes. So they looked up to their elders, temple priests, and of course the panchayat. So now this is a picture of a panchayat. I know Vikram is going to say that panchayat is not mediation, because we've had this conversation before. But as you can see from this picture, this gentleman is standing there, and you have this whole group of people listening to him. So now, is this actually traditional mediation? I'll save that for my discussion later, where I will talk about the difference between how culture has actually impacted mediation in the communities. So coming back to this method, so for now, I will refer to the panchayat as a facilitator. And these facilitators, so traditionally in Malaysia, these Indian migrant workers, as I said, they were laborers. So they, as I said, they were working in the plantations, and they had lower administrative positions handed down to them by the British. And there's this system for the laborers known as the Kangani system. And they were selected. So these Kanganis were selected to go back to India, recruit workers for villages, and they came back. So these Kanganis were like one up from their fellow laborers. So they were respected. So if there was a dispute within the plantation, they would look up to these Kanganis and have to get their disputes resolved. So the Indians were also famous for building temples and shrines. And even until today, I must say, it's like in small villages, you suddenly see a small temple or a shrine. So temple priests were also very well respected, and they looked up to them for guidance for resolution of disputes. And so the Indian community, the Kanganis who went back to India, came back, brought these workers, and adopted all these practices in Malaysia as well. And it was assimilated and adopted by the Malaysian Indian community pre-colonization, and even when the British rule, when the British were there in Malaya at that time. And panchayat, okay, coming to panchayat. The panchayat practice of resolving disputes amicably at the community level also originates from India. And normally what panchayat means is village council, and an elective council of about 5 influential older men acknowledged by the community as its governing body, so to say. And the villagers relied on the panchayat to resolve conflicts that arose within the community. So this concept has been enshrined in the Indian culture. But of course, I would say that, after the British came and colonized Malaysia, everything withered down, as I said, and people became more litigious over the years. And now people are very litigious, maybe just as bad as the Westerners. So coming back to our topic. So those basic, what I spoke about this now is basically about the three main ethnic groups in Malaysia and how deep-rooted mediation, the culture of mediation is within the three communities. Now let's look at the impact of cultural norms and values on mediation. Now, because as I said, Malaysia comes from such a multilingual, multi-ethnic background, so the variety of norms and beliefs and values of the Malaysian community is diverse. Irrespective of the diversity, there are many similarities of some of the norms and values practiced by Malaysians. So it sort of got intermingled. So I'm going to call this norms and values, which I'm going to refer to as Malaysian culture. Malaysian culture. So one of the main cultures is, of course, respect and etiquette, I think, which exists in most communities around the world. And it is an important aspect in the Malaysian culture. And of course, there are many cultural taboos and norms that are perceived as offensive in Malaysian culture, especially in the Malay culture. Like, for instance, if you go into mediation, right, the first thing we are told to do is, of course, we put our hand out to shake somebody's hand. But in Malaysia, for Malaysian women of the Muslim faith, they may find that very inappropriate. So never extend your hand, to a Malaysian Muslim woman unless she extends her hand out first. So these are some of the, it's a taboo. And there are many other taboos like handing over documents with the left hand instead of the right hand during a mediation process may seem to be rude and unacceptable. And hand gestures, body language, non-verbal communication is also very important. So all these come under the big umbrella of respect and etiquette. So Malaysians are generally very discreet and modest in their body language. So their attire, their demeanor in Malay culture is termed as halus. Halus is a Malay word. The translation is refined. So they're very refined, and this behavior is referred to as berbudi bahasa or man of culture. That's the translation of berbudi bahasa. So it's very important. All these are important norms and values of Malaysians. So when mediating, mediators have to take note of these norms and values and not offend any one of the parties during mediation if you're unaware of the norms and values. The other huge norm which is followed by many Malaysians is one of saving face. Now Malaysians, I couldn't find a proper picture for this, but this cartoon here actually depicts a man trying to grab a bill and run off to pay. Malaysians are famous for that. So please do come to Malaysia because everybody rushes to pay the bill at the end of the meal. So because they want to save face. So coming back to the concept of face, face is actually a Chinese concept, I would say. It originated from China, and it's called mianzi in Chinese culture. It has been assimilated with the Malaysian culture and is in the Malay language, we refer to it as jatuh air muka. If you translate jatuh air muka literally, it's dropping your water face. So you can imagine what that means. So Malaysians strive to maintain face in their daily life, and they try to avoid shame, I suppose, in many communities as well. So face can be described as a combination of social standing, reputation, influence, dignity, and honor. And in the Chinese business culture, a person's reputation and social standing rests on face saving. So it is a huge concept which I think which is integrated into the Malaysian culture as well. So the converse, of course, is shame or malu in the Malay language. So during mediation, the disputants in a Malaysian culture may cling on to their demands and positions for fear of losing face. And they may because they don't want to be deemed to be giving in so easily. So because of this cultural norm and values which they have, they carry it into mediation as well. So mediators have to be aware of this as well. So it's not a good idea during the joint sessions, of course, to raise things like this. This is best taken to the private sessions where the mediators can ventilate these issues during the caucus session with the mediators. So that's a suggestion on how to deal with this value which is so highly placed in Malaysian culture. So the concept of face also helps parties build better relationships and better interaction as well during the mediation process. So one good thing or important factor would be maybe apologizing and acknowledging a mistake early during mediation may go a long way in building trust and mending relationships. But on the other hand, parties may not want to do that because they may not want to lose face. So it is a very dicey sort of situation, whether you should acknowledge at the beginning or at the end. It's all going to be tactical and depends on what the mediator is going to do. And I think that this concept is also important in, as I said, in many cultures. So let's move on. The next norm or value would be collectivism. So collectivism versus individualism. And collectivism is actually a norm in Malaysian culture, like in many Asian societies. So what this means is the interests of a group takes precedence over the interests of an individual. So even if obligations to the group may be disadvantageous to the individual, that would take precedence. And they're willing to forego whatever individual interest which may not be favorable to them for the good of the group, for the group of the collective group. And in a family context, emphasis is placed on respect for the elderly, unity, and loyalty. So norms, obligations, and duties to groups are the collectivist primary concerns. And they tend to place a high value on group harmony and solidarity. So some of the other traits are respectfulness and cooperation. And these are some of the traits of collectivists. So maintaining good relations with group members is of very high priority. So in a mediation context, collectivists tend to view conflict as an anomaly. So conflict is regarded as shameful, and going to mediation could signify loss of face, which I spoke about earlier. So parties may actually be reluctant to participate in voluntary mediation, as it may be an acknowledgement of an inability to maintain a harmonious relationship. I don't know, I've not done any research on this or done a survey on this, but this could be the reason why the growth of mediation is so slow in Malaysia. I don't know whether this could be one of the reasons why, but it could very well be. And during mediation, parties may also be reluctant to participate actively, or they may actually exhibit signs of anxiety and confusion. And I mean, as I said, I've been mediating for the past 20 years. And I've seen that this is true, because in our society, I realized that you have to coax them to speak. They don't speak voluntarily. And sometimes of course, in mediation, we tell parties that, because we are trained by the Westerners, the facilitative mediation model, that party autonomy is so important and parties are supposed to voice out their grievances. But sometimes, because of cultural norms and values of a particular group, like in the Malaysian culture, it may be difficult for them to voice out their own grievances. They sometimes look to lawyers who may or may not be helpful, or sometimes they look for guidance from the mediator. It is because of these inherent norms and values which exist in their culture. And in Malaysia as well, they are very concerned about titles, status recognition. Like if someone is a dato, is someone who's been awarded like a lord, okay? So it's they're given this honorifics by the sultans of the states. So if you don't refer to them as by their datos or their titles, they get offended. And so the use of surnames, like in the Western society, people are very easygoing. Call me Bob, call me Mary, call me Jade, you know, but that doesn't go very well with Malaysians. So because they come from a collective society. And so these are some of the expectations which parties may have during mediation, and mediators, knowing these norms exist, should be wary of these norms. And lastly, I would like to talk about communication, which is another norm and value which is very, very important in any negotiation and in any mediation or communication. So we all know fruitful negotiations can best be achieved by the quality and impact of good communication. I mean, we all know that. So in Asian culture, communication and conduct gearing towards Confucianism principles of preserving harmony and relationship, faith, peace, all this is very important. So when a mediator is mediating a dispute in Malaysia, he has to be aware of this communication rules, as I would say, because they need to maintain civility between the parties who are in the mediation room. So sometimes silence should not be taken wrongly. Silence is also an important element of communication in Malaysia. As you can see from this picture here, there are universal facial expressions of happiness, sadness, anger, fear. So silence is one of them. And so don't view it wrongly if you're mediating in Malaysia and people keep quiet. Pausing is another indication, yeah, that they may be thinking of what to answer. And reliance on non-verbal communication is also very, very important in Malaysia, in Malaysian mediation, because we look out for things like, I suppose in any mediation, body language, eye contact, facial expressions, and voice, the tone of voice is used as a guide as well. Yeah, so Malaysians tend to be more subtle rather than be direct in their communication. Because these are all inherited from their forefathers, the culture of not being directive during communication. So they prefer indirect methods of communication. So, but of course, we all know that, as we are taught as facilitative mediators, direct communication between the parties is important. But all these factors have to be taken into account when mediating in Malaysia. So communication, of course, is the mediator's tool. So we need to be very wary of this. And the Malaysian government has also sort of taken initiatives to promote community mediation. So after colonization, mediation sort of dwindled and got lost. And slowly but surely, the community mediation centers started being set up by the government. And the first initiative was called the Rukun Tetangga. So Rukun Tetangga is basically a neighborhood dispute resolution center. So this picture here is a typical Rukun Tetangga community hall in one of the states in Malaysia, which existed. So this program was initiated by the Department of National Unity and Integration in Malaysia. And the aim of this program was to foster unity and integration among the people, and at the same time, provide an opportunity for residents to resolve disputes at the community level without going to court or government agencies. So that is why they set up the Rukun Tetangga. And basically, it took off very well. And there was the pilot program, as I said, was initiated in 1975. And the government also played a part in trying to promote this by setting this up in all the different states and in smaller communities. And finally, this culminated in the coming into the Rukun Tetangga Act in 2012. So they took a long time to actually come up with the act for this, but this is a good act, because in the act, one of the provisions is that to provide community mediation for the purpose of conciliation or otherwise settle any dispute or difference amongst the members of community. So mediation was given the force of law here. For one of the first initiatives by the government to give force of law to mediation. And this was also timely because the Mediation Act also came into force then. And the other initiative by the government is called the Justices of Peace to conduct community mediation. Now, Justices of Peace are again a heritage of the British rule in Malaysia. And initially during the British rule, they had district officers and assistant district officers. So they were appointed as JPs or Justices of Peace to alleviate the inadequate pool of magistrates at that time. And the JPs were appointed by the state authorities and conferred powers not exceeding that of a second-class magistrate. So they were slightly lower than a magistrate's level. And recently, in 2017, Penang is another state in Malaysia. And the Justices of Peace, as you can see in this picture, Council of Justices of the Peace of the state of Penang, they set up for the first time a mediation, the Justices of Peace Mediation Bureau. So this was with the aim to advance community mediation in Penang. And this was to cater for resolving disputes with small and medium businesses within the business community. So it's for the SMEs. And the panel of mediators, very surprisingly, have also been trained. They have undergone mediation skills training. So they are actually equipped to mediate community disputes and family disputes. So hopefully other states follow suit, but so far none of the other states have followed what the Penang state has done. So that is how, that is, of course, now mediation in Malaysia As I said, after the Mediation Act came into force in 2012, mediation has taken off in a bigger way, but in the courts. Not so much private mediation, but more in the courts because it's part of the court system and it's called court annexed mediation. Whereas private mediation is conducted by the Bar Council, by the advocates and solicitors of the Malaysian Bar. We have our own Malaysian mediation center, and you have other smaller mediation centers around the country, like the arbitration AIAC, the International Arbitration Center in Malaysia. They also have their own panel of mediators. And we have mediation conducted by some of the tribunals, like the Housing Tribunal and other tribunals in the country. So it is spreading surely, but slowly, very slowly. And I mean, sincerely, I hope that, you know, it will take off in a big way, and we should introduce community mediation for all the other states as well. Now, I would like to end before I end my presentation, I would just like to share with you my thoughts on the impact of culture on mediation, because I think this topic is very close to all our hearts, because we're all speaking at this symposium organized by Vikram. And of course, I know some of the questions which Vikram has asked the other speakers is what is the role of culture on mediation? So before he asks me this question, I'd like to preempt that by answering him now. And I would like to say that basically there are two schools of thoughts at different continents. Yeah, one is the universalist versus the culturalist. So when you look at culture, cross-culture really has a significant, does cross-culture actually have a significant impact on human interactions and mediations? Because the universalists say that conflicts are universal in nature. Humans manifest universal patterns of behavior. So you can read those patterns. So you can actually have a universal model of conflict resolution for everyone. One size fits all, one model. Culture has no role in dispute resolution according to the universalists, and if at all, very minimal. On the other hand, on the other end of the continent, you have the culturalists. So of course, the culturalists say that culture is important. It does have an impact on mediation, but culture is complex, it's dynamic, it's multi-dimensional, as you would have heard from my presentation earlier. It's so varied, and yet there are similarities. So the culturalists believe that it is personal to the individual. So the models of conflict resolution cannot be generalized, which moves us to the next question. Is the facilitative interest-based mediation model suitable for the Asian community? So it's Eastern versus Western. We really don't have the answers unless we do research and survey, but there has been some research done in Singapore by Professor Joel Lee. And I would like to share it's very interesting. And so that's why I decided to share this with all my fellow mediators here listening in. So as you can see from this picture here, this is a joint session scenario. So normally in the Western world, you would think that party autonomy is central to a facilitative-based mediation model, because we all say that party autonomy is very important. Parties make decisions for themselves. Parties must decide for themselves. That's what we are taught, because we've been taught by the Western mediators. I'm not saying it's wrong, because I do believe in mediation. But this is how the Westerners view it. So the mediator is there as a facilitator. he's not put up on a pedestal like how traditional mediators or facilitators were looked up upon during pre-colonization days, like what I shared with you earlier, because normally they are someone is of respected, someone who's respected in the community, high standing, etc. Here, the mediator in the Western concept is a neutral. He's an impartial facilitator. So the aim in the facilitative mediation model is to maximize individual interests, maximize gains. That is what we were taught. And you ask open questions, you expect people to participate actively during the mediation with direct and open communication. So this is on the premise that parties are not reticent. They are going to be actively promoting and talking about their dispute and sharing options on how to resolve the dispute. But is this really so in our society? As a mediator in Malaysia, coming from that roots, which I spoke about earlier, I mean, not everyone, I'm not trying to generalize as well, but from my experience, I can safely say that Malaysians are not very direct and open in communication. They have to be nudged. They have to be nudged and pushed. Otherwise, it's very difficult for them to talk to one another during mediation. And in the Western community, relationship building is to secure a good outcome for all. That is what we are taught in the facilitative model. But when you look at the other end of the continent, the Malaysian or the Asian mentality or roots or culture of mediation, these are all cultural assumptions because the mediator is the heart of the mediation process in an Asian culture. High social status, they are generally leaders, and interests. I spoke about collectivism. So as opposed to individualism in the Western community. In the Asian community, I think they talk, because they come from a collectivist culture, family or group interest takes precedence. And similarly, when you're talking about communication, it is indirect because they may feel that they don't want to lose face because that is something which they value very much. And to preserve harmony, like what Confucius said, and to preserve peace and relationship, they may not want to go, and heads on with the person and be very direct in communication during mediation, because that is not on in, if culturally it's not on for a Malaysian person to be so direct. It's better to be indirect. So these are some of the cultural assumptions which have been made by the communities when we first started mediation or facilitation in the Asian culture, and for the Westerners as well, because it basically they're two different cultures. And so the question is the same model of mediation suitable for both communities? I'm not saying that the facilitative interest mediation model is a bad model, but my question to my fellow mediators is this a suitable model, bearing in mind that we come from different cultural backgrounds and the effect of it on the disputants and the mediator. So in conclusion, I would say that we need to do more work on this to see whether it is a suitable model for the Asian community. And Malaysians, in my view, should strive. I have one more slide, sorry. So some of the tensions which arise in the Asian context because of the use of the facilitative mediation model are as follows. One is party autonomy. As I said, in the facilitative mediation model, we talk about party autonomy. But in the Asian culture, parties may feel this is out of place. Hey, this is not my backyard, I can't be autonomous. I need guidance from the mediator. I need help from the mediator to tell me what to do, to tell me what or suggest the decisions for me. And they may feel that the mediator is ineffective if he doesn't suggest. They might say the mediator is not doing their job. And surprisingly, I've been asked this question so many times during my mediation sessions, during my opening session, opening statements, when I tell parties that I'm not here to make any decisions for you because you're going to make your own decisions. Oh, so you're not going to make any decision for me. So they are like surprised that the mediator is not going to make any decisions. So they may view that because I'm not making any decisions, I may be an ineffective mediator and I don't have any authority. Who am I? I'm just one of the list of mediators from the Malaysian Mediation Center. I'm not someone who's high up in, in some, put up on a pedestal in some social status. Yeah. So the mediator may be viewed as abdicating his responsibility. And parties may actually find it difficult to make decisions without input. Now, this is a very interesting thing to discuss, maybe for later on, or maybe food for thought for my fellow mediators. Because one question is, should mediators suggest options for settlement to the parties? Of course, the strict facilitative mediation model says that mediators are not supposed to suggest options for the parties. Parties are supposed to come up with their own options for settlement. But is this really realistic in the Asian culture? But because culturally they are not open to direct communication, it is hard for them to give input, to make decisions for themselves, because decisions have always been made for them. So can they appreciate making decisions for themselves and not dealing with open confrontation? So maybe joint sessions, they may also feel uncomfortable. I have seen in many mediations where parties are actually uncomfortable and they open up more to the mediator when they are in private sessions, simply because they don't want to lose face. So this is basically some of the tensions which may arise in the Asian context because of cultural impact on mediation, whether the facilitative model is actually something which is suitable for our community. So I would like to end with this quote by Confucius, that although I listen to the cases as others judge, I must make my best effort to instruct people to live without litigation. Thank you very much.
Wow, Gunavathi. It was expected, obviously, that it'll be a great presentation, but the amount of effort you've put into it is amazing. Amazing. I mean, obviously, there is so much more to discuss, and now you haven't left much to me. Obviously, I've become so predictable. But I think the important thing is, what I'm seeing is that the Malaysian government has been very progressive. The Mediation Act is in place. Maybe you can tell us a little briefly about the act, and this Rukun Tatanga I was very happy with. I mean, that also a little elaboration on how it works. I think both will be important.
The Mediation Act is an act close to my heart because I was involved in the drafting of the act. So, but unfortunately, it's not what I drafted. So it got whittled down here and there. And the most important thing, which is non-existent in our Mediation Act, is there is no a provision for enforcement of mediated settlements. It is very sad, very, very sad that I did put it in. I did include that provision in sometime in 2010 when I got involved in the drafting of the act. And that is one of the first provisions which I said that it has to be there, because otherwise it's not going to give it the force of law. And unfortunately, that provision, the enforcement provision, was removed from the Act. It was very sad. And so the Act is a toothless tiger, if you ask me. It's just an Act, but it's a toothless tiger, because no enforcement, no sanctions, no cost sanctions if you don't comply or you breach any of the provisions. So in a nutshell, I would say it's a toothless tiger.
But any idea why they did that? I mean, have there been discussions on that?
I so far no, but I've actually been asked to sit in this new committee which has been set up by the government to discuss the amendments to the Act in light of the Singapore Convention. So we're definitely going to try and include the enforcement provisions in the Act, because otherwise, I think it's going to be very difficult for Malaysia to ratify the Singapore Convention if we do not amend the Act. As the Act, as it stands now, I think it's going to be very difficult for Malaysia to ratify the Singapore Convention. I mean, that is my view.
Yeah. And what about the Rukun Tetangga? That also seems to be a very interesting act. Yeah,
the Rukun Tetangga Act is very interesting, but somehow I do not know why it has not really taken off so well. At one point of time, the Rukun Tetangga, as I said, it started off as a peaceful neighborhood dispute resolution mechanism. And my father was one of the Rukun Tetangga chairmans, in my neighborhood when I was a young girl. I can still remember my dad. We used to have so many people coming to the house. So my father was also a mediator. So I'm taking after my dad. So, so
hereditary. It's hereditary.
I think it's hereditary. I think so too.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you this thing. Actually, it's very interesting. I'll tell you about this because I was speaking to someone in some part of India, and he said actually there is a family where they've been doing mediation. That family's been doing mediation in their village for years. I mean, generations.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. We have to bring all this out as we go along.
So you have to teach your children as well.
Or maybe they just pick it up. They just pick it up around you. You've picked it up. Definitely.
And we were talking about peer mediation at some time ago. So I think it's best we hand this down or pass this down to all the children and our friends' children, and inculcate this mediation culture, as you and I would put it, in these youngsters. So coming back to the Rukun Tetangga Act, so sadly, I remember people coming to my house. I mean, this is my experience from my dad's tenureship as the chairman of the Rukun Tetangga in my neighborhood. And there were so many people who used to come to my parents' home for resolution of disputes. And my father was always very active in trying to go and resolve disputes here and there, and all. Maybe also because of his background as a headmaster. So maybe that helped. I don't know. But unfortunately, it sort of dwindled down, and then there were not many neighborhood watch at that time because there were a lot of robberies. So how it actually started was because there were a lot of robberies in different neighborhoods and all. So they decided to have this neighborhood watch. So this Rukun Tetangga was set up as a peaceful neighborhood dispute watch, where they go around with batons and sticks, walking around, doing their rounds at night to look out for robbers and to keep the community safe. So that is how it actually started, this whole Rukun Tetangga concept. And then it slowly developed into resolution of disputes for the community. And I think the government wanted to give it force of law. And that is why they came up with the Act in 2012. But now they are training a lot of mediators. I think they have about 500 mediators who have actually been trained under this, pursuant to this Act. The government, the National Integration Unity Department of the government has actually been training mediators based from all these other neighborhoods. So I think it is progressing quite well because they have trained mediators under this Rukun Tetangga program now.
But is it binding, whatever happens there?
No, as I said, mediation does not have force of law here. That is unfortunate. Yeah. So not like in India where you have your Mediation and Conciliation Act. So unfortunately in Malaysia, it's not the case. So
surprising. I really think it's surprising that they would do that. Okay. Yeah. So now some questions for you. Raza wants to know, how does Sharia court function in parallel to civil courts? Why do these two kinds of courts exist?
Oh, okay. This is interesting because, as I said, we come from different ethnic backgrounds. So, of course, the Muslims they follow the Islamic laws and Islamic religion. So their laws are not binding on the non-Muslims. So the non-Muslims go to the civil courts, especially the Sharia courts only deals with family disputes for the Muslim community, because the family disputes are different for the non-Muslims. And the law is also different for the non-Muslims when it comes to family, inheritance, and maintenance. Those are the only things dealt with by the Sharia courts. But for the rest of the matters, they all come within the purview of the civil courts. So it's two different courts. So only handling family, inheritance, and maintenance.
The other question obviously related to that is, why are lawyers not allowed to be present while mediation is in process in Sharia courts?
This is very interesting. I do not know the background of this, but as I said, I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, because sometimes lawyers can be spoilers. I am sad to say that, but I think, if being a lawyer myself, but I personally feel, as a mediator, I have mediated numerous disputes, but with the assistance of a lawyer, it makes a difference when a lawyer is there and when a lawyer is not there. I'm not saying this just because I'm a lawyer, but when lawyers are there and they are trained mediators, or they know what is mediation advocacy, then they are very helpful to the mediator. But if they are not trained and they are all litigious, they are basically litigation lawyers, very combative, they behave differently during mediation, and they sometimes can influence their clients. So I think, coming back to the question which you posed, why are lawyers not allowed in the suluh proceedings in the Sharia courts, is maybe I feel that I think they view that lawyers could actually be a hindrance to the process. And very strangely, Vikram, let me just also point out that the court annexed mediation conducted in Malaysia by the various state mediation centers also has a very unique way of I'm trying to reframe now, to use the right words as a mediator, a unique way of mediating, because what they do is they invite parties in a joint session with lawyers, of course, because it's a court process, part of the court process, lawyers can come in. But very strangely, what they do is, after the opening statement and getting the rough idea of what the dispute is about, the mediators in the court send the lawyers out. So lawyers are actually not there during the discussions during the joint sessions or the private sessions. Private sessions are held one-on-one with the parties and the mediator, but the lawyer is waiting outside. So most of the time in our court mediation, the lawyers are waiting outside chambers.
Wow. So I think, look, in general, first of all, Abe put a thumbs up. Being a non-lawyer mediator, I think he immediately understood why lawyers are not required. But interestingly, Giovanni had made a presentation. He was talking about 18th century Holland. They said that that whole process should happen without lawyers. So I think that there is something there which definitely, there is something to it. I mean, if lawyers like it or don't like it, I mean, that's something which will happen. So he also, Reza's other question in that was, do civil courts practice mediation, which you obviously said they are practicing mediation. So that part is covered. Then direct communication brings transparency in context and text to the result is accurate. How indirect communication is able to produce more accurate and efficient results?
Well, that's a tough one. Of course, as I said, we are all trained in facilitative mediation. We are taught how to communicate directly. But if you rely on culture and the way people behave and are comfortable, the Asians may not be as comfortable as the Westerners to employ a direct means of communication. Of course, it may not be as effective an indirect way of communicating. It is difficult to read between the lines, or things which we are taught as a mediator, all the things to look out for, like body language and things like that. It is hard if parties are going to keep quiet throughout the mediation. It is going to be very difficult. And I do agree that, indirect communication may not elicit as much information as someone who employs a direct communicative method of speaking and gathering information.
No. Okay, so now this question, basically, Prabhat has a question, which is, of course, connected to the way lawyers practice their profession, which according to me is there's no one particular way they should, but if the judicial process is an evidence-based model in search of linear arguments, does mediation become a challenging proposition for lawyers?
I definitely think so, Prabha, because I think mediation has not taken off in a big way in this country. This is my personal view. I think mainly because of lawyers, because I think it all goes down to how we are trained as lawyers. Because if you're a litigation lawyer, I think in law school, let's go back to law school. In law school, we are only exposed to moods and we are taught to be combative. Only now, recently, in recent years, mediation has been introduced as a subject to schools. ADR has been introduced, and they have moot competitions for students, and now they have mediation competitions for students, which I was so excited when I first got involved in the first mediation competition, because we've been preaching about mediation, and it's like, voila, now we have mediation competition as well, and not only moot competitions. So coming back to Prabha's question, I think as lawyers, because we are trained to be combative in law school, there needs to be a paradigm mindset shift in lawyers before they can actually fully embrace mediation. And that has been the sore point here in Malaysia as well. I mean, that is my view, because I feel that most lawyers, they feel that it's eating into their rice bowl. They feel that it eats into their rice bowl if you go for mediation, because, oh, how much can I charge? Oh, if I go for this matter and I take it up to the High Court, I can bill so much. And even if I don't have a good case, I can tell my client, even if I lose, let's appeal to the Court of Appeal, or let's appeal to a higher court, because they want to make money. No, there are very few lawyers who would actually suggest going for mediation. So, I mean, I do. I always pick up the phone and tell my opponent and ask my opponent, do you want to discuss this? Let's negotiate, or let's go for mediation. But many of them are reluctant. I don't know whether that's the case in India, Prabha. I don't know, but
he's not a lawyer. He's not a lawyer.
Prabha is not a lawyer. So I think the main thing is the training. It goes back to law school.
I would still say, Gunavathi, it's a mindset, because everyone who comes out of law school doesn't go into litigation. There is this feeling that lawyers and litigation is connected to each other. I think we just have to move away from that. A lot of people have not practiced in the courts. They have got out of law schools and they've done practice maybe in corporate law or whatever else. So yes. I think first of all, we need to be able to tell people that lawyers go beyond litigation, and the ones who don't get into litigation might not have the mindset, that adversarial mindset. So we must use those people, maybe.
No, but just to take it one step further, of course, not everybody goes into litigation or become courtroom lawyers. There are also people who go into the corporate sector. But I mean, I've seen from both sides of the coin, because I also practice corporate law. And I mean, I also draft agreements for my clients. And I always insist on putting a dispute resolution clause with mediation in my agreements. But not many lawyers do that. And the Malaysian Bar Council actually came up with standard clauses to include mediation in agreements. So we actually circulated it to all lawyers and told lawyers, please include this sort of dispute resolution clauses. But many out there in the industry do not include mediation. They only include arbitration. For them, when you're talking about alternative dispute resolution, it is arbitration, not mediation. So I noticed that, in many contracts, the mediation clauses are not included. But now it is slowly changing. It is slowly changing.
Okay. So our non-lawyer friend Abe says he's in favor of the non-legal enforcement of agreements reached in mediation. There is an avenue for the parties to make the agreement legal. Okay, that's a comment. Okay, it's a comment.
Oh, it's a comment.
Well, I think that's a comment. So Elisaveta from Russia. So obviously she's thanking the speakers. So during the last presentation, I found that in Russia, we have something from Asian model of mediation. Russians, as in Malaysia, want mediator to create the solution for them. And they're usually surprised that mediator can't give them advice. So it is something which is prevalent in a lot of places. So I think that aspect has to be looked at. So there's one model cannot go around the world.
Yep.
So now Abe is also wanting to tell us. I'm going through this, not asking you people, because I still want to keep this whole thing short enough that people watch it on YouTube. Otherwise, if it becomes too long, that becomes a problem if people don't watch it. And this is such an excellent presentation, people have to watch. We'll make sure. Okay. So Abe said there are very important reasons for not having lawyers in mediation. There are other ways for parties accessing legal advice whenever they need it. Okay, and Elizabeth again, and also in private conversation, they can tell more when speaking with another party, whatever. Maybe Elizabeth can elaborate on that. And I think Elizabeth had some problem in the sound issue. Elizabeth, if you want to come in, you can. If you want to say something, because that question of yours, was it elaborate? You want to elaborate that? I wasn't able to get that.
Okay, hello. I'm sorry that I didn't on my sound before. I just want to say thank you to both our speakers for today. It was really interesting for me to hear about your experience as in Malaysia and as in Australia before also. Because in Russia, I think our experience is much more younger in mediation, because only 10 years we use this procedure, but as I see in both your countries, it works much better and includes in different system of government also, and is I heard in Australia it works and in schools, and they teach sorry. So I just want to say thank you so much for your presentation. It was really, really interesting for me. Thank you.
Okay. So now the thing is, now Abe has a comment, but I think we need to tell Abe that he should not put all lawyers under the same category. I think that part he says lawyers need to preserve their own interest and profession, as if everyone else doesn't preserve their own interest, first of all. And we are some exception in this world. The other thing is that, one sec, I don't know. Okay. They have not been educated enough to see value for them utilizing mediation into their practice. So we are one big community and all of us think the same. That part of it, Gunavathi, you'll have to be able to. I don't want to say too much. You want to say something?
It's hard. Okay, what we should strive to do is to strive to have a mediation community amongst us. And I think you have done an excellent job, Vikram, by hosting this symposium for so many speakers and promoting mediation the way you do it. So I hope that everyone will support you, and appreciate what you have done. I think you deserve a round of applause.
Thank you. One thumbs up has come. I can see that. Okay. Look, it feels nice to be appreciated. I mean, it just is you keep doing your work. I was to Prabhat, I sent him a message which comes from our thing that, there's a saying that I won't go into that saying, but it basically is you do your work. You don't think about the result, what you're going to get out of it. You just do what you have to do. So there should be no motive behind it, but you just keep doing it. So that's how it is. If something comes in, doesn't come in, appreciation happens, doesn't happen, but you have to keep doing it. So, okay. So now obviously Abe has suddenly realized that he's talking to two lawyers. So he's clarified. I only meant the lawyers who resist mediation. Quick one, how to get out of it. Abe, we've taken your comment on record. I mean, you cannot get away with this. So now
Thank you,
basically, so Giovanni now says, and look, I mean, this is all because of my promotion, I would say, Giovanni. All over the world now, mediation is under the lights. Why in the same time? Now he's a little surprised. But maybe I think at this point, let Giovanni, although I don't want people to take it, but I think Giovanni needs to come in because he's saying a nice thing, that mediation is out there. Yes, Giovanni.
Yes. Hi, Guna. Best compliments for your speech. Very interesting, of course, as usual. Yes, it is amazing that until 20 years, 30 years ago, except in the USA, I think that all over the world, no lawyer schools spoke about mediation, about ADRs. And now at a certain time, all over the world, there is an interest. And I think that the unique answer is the huge backlog in the civil courts all over the world. And now, yeah, we are trying, we are obliged to find something different, something to solve the problem. And why in every word, in every country, there is this overlock. I read the answer yesterday. I think that our mediators now have a very good chance to understand much better each other and try to help people and to help also ourselves to manage different, very big problems. The next huge problem, and then use possibility for mediation, is environmental mediation. Let's have a think about it. Many thanks.
Giovanni, what you do is, Ken Cloke has written a paper. I mean, he's put out certain points. And of course, he's been part of the discussions on climate change and how he feels mediators can come in, the role of mediators in that. So I think you should have, I don't know whether you have to look at
Vikram, your effort now is incredible because you are just connecting people from all over the world. And you are just really paying huge efforts just to manage all this symposium. This is one. There's a way. Another possible way, I think, just to write just write articles and share our opinion. Articles just with the same framework, just to better understand what's happening in other countries and to make better comparisons. Well, you know, just the same framework in different countries, and read them and try to understand why the difference, how to solve them, how to cope with different problems.
So that is
what
I mean.
I think that your effort now is incredible, extremely useful.
And the idea is that you people connect to each other and you have these discussions, and let's take it forward from there. I mean, this is just one of the things of connecting people. But this Ken Cloke thing, I will send it to you. I mean, he's actually looked at this aspect of the role of mediators. I'd actually done a little session and we had a discussion on role of mediators in social problem solving and global problem solving, including climate change. So we had a discussion on that. Maybe it's on my YouTube channel. If you get time, you can have a look at that. So I think at this point, Reza has come in a little later, Guna. You answered his questions, but I think he went out. So Reza, I think you'll have to just watch the video later, and because she's answered everything that you had asked. So that's how it is. Okay, Reza? So Guna, thank you very much. Your excellent presentation. And we have to, I think, really the kind of effort you've put in. What I do, let me just unmute, ask everyone to unmute, and I think the claps will just go on. So, because I really feel that this is what we needed. I mean, these are.
Thank you, Vikram.
Thank you. Brilliant, just brilliant.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I've written a paper. I'm fine tuning it. I will circulate to everyone once it's edited. Okay, I will share my paper with everyone.
Great. All right. So at this point, can I cut this off? Everyone's done their clapping and everything. Please, like I said, standing ovation might be a problem.